Good morning from Rio de Janeiro to everyone. We're going to start the second session of the ICTMD dialogue series of 2025. And this session, this very thought-provoking session, is titled Music and Dance Research in Time of Crisis. So we will have 5 presentations today. The structure we will follow is having 3 presentations at first, and the speakers will always present themselves shortly at the beginning, and then we will proceed to a video. And then we'll have, after the first 3 presentations, Q&A part, after which we'll have the last 2 presentations, also with a Q&A session on their presentations, and then a general discussion between participants on the themes which will be raised and discussed throughout this very session. I'll call them. Our first speaker, Maria Gabriela Lopez Yanes from Ecuador, and she'll present to us, We Will Never Be White, Dancing Ecuadorian Identities as Resistance in the Midst of a National Crisis. Please, Gabi, introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Maria Gabriela Lopez Yanes. I'm a performer, researcher, and artist from Ecuador. I'm speaking from Quito, Ecuador, on the day 18 of the national strike, a massive mobilization led mainly by indigenous and rural communities protesting austerity, extractivism, and inequality. Independent human rights monitors have documented 257 violations, 127 injured people, more than 100 detentions, 12 temporary disappearances, and 1 confirmed death. Government figures are lower, but repression and militarization have intensified. Human rights groups warn of possible escalation, night raids, criminalizations of protest leaders, and the use of the so-called less lethal weapons that have caused deaths in past uprisings. I speak then from a country in tension, where bodies, voices, and movements insist on being heard, even under threat. This presentation is part of that insistence, a reminder that performance too is a form of resistance. Thank you. This is my country right now. By the time you hear these words, it may already be worse. Local indigenous leaders and human rights observers warn of escalating repression and an imminent massacre.
Denunciamos la brutalidad con la que los militares han atacado a población civil indefensa, mientras siguen sin dar una respuesta efectiva a la crisis de inseguridad que golpea al país.
The president refuses to negotiate. branding indigenous protesters as terrorists. One protester, Efraín Fuérez, has already been murdered by the state while exercising the constitutional right to protest. I am speaking from inside this emergency in Ecuador's northern Andes, accountable to indigenous communities. But wait, aren't we supposed to talk about dance? Why aren't we simply holding hands and dancing joyfully together like the airport painting salt to tourists? Because the world around us is falling apart. Neutrality here would be complicity. Our classrooms must answer to the conditions shaping the bodies we teach to dance. I ground my approach in putting the body, poner el cuerpo, as a political pedagogical practice of embodied exposure, care, and co-responsibility in the face of violence, an ethics forged in Latin American feminist struggles where the body is both, first, territory of defense and medium of collective action. In Ecuador, indigenous, Afro-Ecuadorian, and Montubio peoples have been our most enduring teachers of what it means to put our body on the line, through historical uprisings, assemblies, and everyday co-care. I center indigenous struggles because the present crisis has intensified colonial dismissals and violent racism against indigenous peoples as they fight for rights that protect all of us. We will never be white is not a slogan, but a refusal of whitening as a metric of value. By whitening, I mean a colonial aspiration to approximate global North whiteness by denying indigenous and black kin and disciplining speech, taste, and behavior toward an imported norm. It tells us we are never enough unless we mimic whiteness, and it equates whiteness with being civilized. This is being quiet, governable, and non-protesting. Hence the airport painting smile, the noble savage, who dances without context, as if everything were fine, as if consent and satisfaction were already given. Our task is to refuse that neutral spectacle and to rethink what an Ecuadorian dance classroom must do amid projects that render indigenous life disposable, and necropolitical governance deciding who may live or die. Against whitening's fantasy of a singular, frictionless body, we affirm bodies that are multiple and marked, wounded and beautiful, fragile and strong, held by histories and relations. Let us return to the dance classroom. If you were 18 or 20 in Ecuador today, coming of age in a narco-economy, under necropolitical rule, amid a violent uprising, uttered by the international gaze, and watching open racism against indigenous people, wouldn't you need someone to ask where that shared history lives in your body, tongue, feet, hair? Deep down, you know this history also claims you. Those questions open the student works you're about to see. Before the clips. These are classroom explorations built from rigorous introspection. Students research Ecuadorian history from a critical perspective and investigate their family origins, speaking with parents and grandparents, and then begin to create from those findings. The first creation seeks to avoid epistemic emptying of the morphokinim of the zapateo, stomping step, the principal step in Hatun Puncha Inti Raimi, by threading fragments of indigenous resistance history back into its rhythmic logic. Rather than extract the step as folklorized decor, the work resituates it as embodied memory and contemporary claim.
Nosotros, los indígenas, somos excluidos de la sociedad porque dicen que nuestra forma de ser es muy vulgar. Nuestra vestimenta no queda con lo que visten hoy en día. Dicen que nosotros no somos una gente aseada, que nosotros no respetamos a las leyes que la sociedad interpone últimamente. Pero eso es mentira. Mi pueblo, mi sociedad, tienen otras creencias de los pueblos que tienen ahora.
A second exploration addresses how many young people are coached to deny rural smallholder indigenous farming origins. Students bring family archives and embodied tasks from the countryside. Photographs of parents and grandparents, the weight and tilt of a grandfather's hat, and kernels of maize moving hand to hand. The question is how to stand with those ties publicly, with tenderness and dignity, rather than packaging them as souvenirs. Echoing a Quechua rap song that urges us to look to our grandparents before judging indigenous life?
Nos miran como ajenos, con miedo y con recelo. Te invito a averiguar quiénes fueron tus abuelos.
One scene confronts a family secret. An indigenous grandmother kept out of sight. Now spoken, now carried on stage.
Mi abuelita era mestiza.
A veces.
Mi abuelita era indígena.
A veces. Mi abuelita a veces era indígena.
Todos lo sabíamos. Pero
A third cluster centers language as a racialized marker. We begin with a brief video of Blanca Chancoso, an eminent indigenous leader, speaking in Quechua at an indigenous march during the 2025 national strike. Her voice frames Quechua not as folklore, but as public political language.
Hasta un compañero con A. ¡Viva el paro, compañeros! ¡Viva San Rafael! ¡Viva las mujeres! ¡Viva la lucha del pueblo organizado!
In class, one indigenous Quechua-speaking student speaks in Quechua, while mixed ancestry classmates explore, quietly, tentatively, after long prohibition, through breath, cadence, and touch, the Quechuismos, Quechua-derived words, already living in their Spanish, tracing how language travels as muscle memory.
Alpagua, Yacúa, Guasha.
Another creation takes hair as a present insult marker. The braid target in attacks against indigenous protesters becomes, for mestiza, mixed ancestry students who recognize their indigenous lineage, a site of pain and claim. On stage, they voice ay ay ay, an Andean exclamation of pain, while a giant red braid is symbolically torn, naming the ongoing assault on their connection to indigenous ancestry. Several recall being forbidden to braid because it signaled a lineage they were told not to show. To close. To put the body on the line in Ecuador today, including in an Ecuadorian dance workshop, is to refuse the tourist frame and to stage life as it's actually lived. Not tidy, not timeless, but situated. Wounded and brave, ordinary and luminous. If our students can rehearse the courage to be themselves and to acknowledge their histories and origins with care, then the stage becomes a place of collective accountability and commitment. Let our dancing interrupt indifference. Let our appearing say, we are here, we listen, we learn, and together we choose to stand with indigenous struggles, in solidarity and repair.
Thank you, Maria Gabriela, for this moving presentation. We'll move forward to the second one by Ioannis Tsoulakis from Greece and also based in the UK. Music labor in times of crisis, epistemological and ethical implications for ethnomusicology. So Ioannis, please quickly introduce yourself.
Yes, hi again, everybody. I have the impossible task of following this extraordinary presentation. Mine is going to be a lot less evocative, but hopefully also contributing to the discussion. My name is Ioannis Tsoulakis, as Samuel said. I'm based in Belfast at Queen's University, so this is where I'm joining you now. But I have been doing research on Greek musicians and issues of economic crisis and precarity and music labor over the past 17 or so years. I hope you enjoy what I have to say, which is mainly kind of reflections on the kinds of themes that I've worked on, and really looking forward to the discussion afterwards. So, welcome to ICTMD Dialogues. Thank you very much for the invite to present here. My name is Ioannis Tsoulakis. I'm a reader in anthropology and ethnomusicology at Queen's University in Belfast. And over the past 15 or so years, I have been doing research on music labor, in particular in Greece. Please bear with me while I read out my opening statement for the dialogues, the title of which is Music Labor in Times of Crisis, Epistemological and Ethical Implications for Ethnomusicology. I will read some of this paper, and then I'm really looking forward to discussing some of its implications with everyone. So, musicians are workers. A seemingly innocuous statement, arguably even a truism. Yet the examination of music performers as laborers is not commonplace in academic literature. In musicological writings, the question of music as labor is very often accompanied by caveats and uttered with reservations. We find ourselves trying to argue that musicians are also workers, or list exceptions of performers who do not fit the descriptor in ways that we wouldn't do for other professions, even within the creative industries. Simon Frith, for example, in a brief article reflecting on the conference Working in Music, writes that, quote, some musicians are considered to be workers, others are not. End quote. Frith further qualifies the statement by pointing out that, quote, the idea of musician as worker has continually been opposed by the idea of musician as creative artist, an auteur who may be happy to benefit from union membership, but does not want to be thought of as a worker. End quote. This tension, Frith argues, is due to a, quote, belief that music, making music, is in itself fun, a pleasurable activity that shouldn't be thought of as work, an idea which is embedded in our culture. End quote. Hence, the value of music, Frith concludes, is, quote, precisely as non-work. Musicians may then be workers, but this shouldn't be. End quote. To be sure, Frith is alone in neither music academia nor industry in expressing this ambivalence. As my own 15-year-long research among music laborers in Greece has cautioned me, performing musicians always iterate exclusions in who qualifies as a worker, and as well as draw boundaries between activities that they regard as work versus what they consider to be play. However, after more than a decade of piling crises of capitalism that have seen increased precarity in all sectors of work, but especially in freelance creative professions, and the exacerbation of insecurity due to the recent pandemic, here I argue that our analysis of music labor needs to be expansive and unreserved. So, recognizing music as labor. First of all, I argue that it makes analytical sense, but also that it is a duty that we have as ethnomusicologists to work towards struggling freelance musicians, especially after the conditions of the pandemic. Now, there's a big obstacle in recognizing all music making as labor, which comes from the engagement with the concept of professionalism. And however, what I want to argue here is that the concept of music labor doesn't need to be conflated with the status of professionalism. In other words, whether or not musicians recognize themselves or are credited by others as professionals is not a prerequisite for an understanding of what they do as labor, as work. So we can do that through multiple theorizations of labor that are independent from issues of professionalism and status, as well as independent from ideas of income and employment. So, for example, some of those concepts that are very helpful are the concept of affective labor that was elaborated on by Michael Hart, Maurizio Lazzarato, and Anna Hoffman specifically in ethnomusicology, which is the labor of evoking affect in others. The concept of emotional labor that was contributed to by Arlie Hochschild, and also in the field of the creative industries by David Hesmontath and Sarah Baker. So this is the work of manipulating emotion, the artist's own emotion, to produce a specific type of performance or other creative work. The concept of aesthetic labor, and this is the work of Ann Witz that I'm having here, I'm thinking about, who draws a lot on ideas by Pierre Bourdieu, and who talks about the idea of curating bodies, behaviors, and skill as part of creative work. So that's aesthetic labor. The idea of phatic labor that Shannon Garland talks about, drawing on the work of anthropologist Julia Eliacher. So this is the labor of creating networks, not just building one's own social capital, but also gifting it to others, creating those networks that for music are extremely important. And that includes both face-to-face, but also online networks. And all these types of labor in the conditions of crisis that I've been documenting connect to the idea of precarity. And here I'm thinking of theorists like Isabel Laurie, Noel Mollet, Gretchen Purser, Angela McRobbie, among others. So the idea of precarious labor that is very much connected to this framework of neoliberal capitalism. So I have done this study of Greek music labor in two different types of contexts. The first was the Greek crisis that lasted from 2009 up until the late, well, arguably continues until today, but at least until the late 2010s. So I see this Greek crisis as a triptych that has three elements. Crisis, which is the kind of generative sort of global economic crisis. The austerity, which is the policy that was used to arguably remedy this crisis, and then precarity, which is the result. So through this triptych of crisis, austerity, and precarity, we have a triptych of neoliberal governance that affected very much workers across all sectors, but especially freelance creative workers, I argue. So musicians in this context were, in a sense, a trained precariat. They were already trained in being precarious in their work, not having secure job, social insurance, and so on. So navigating this Greek crisis was a very difficult sort of business, which was mainly marked, I argue in my book, by isolation, internalization, individualism, and an idea of entrepreneurship, kind of creating opportunities. And as Athina Athanasiou, a Greek anthropologist, argues, making oneself available to the crisis. So kind of internalizing those kind of characteristics that make one flexible and adopting this kind of neoliberal talk of the crisis. At the same time, I documented ways out for musicians, and these were both strategic, individual kind of strategies of kind of coping with the crisis, but also they were aesthetic, creating new types of genres that were specifically connected and commenting on the crisis, right? And these, I argue in my book, were seeds of resistance. But I do end the book by lamenting the lack of solidarity that I found there, these kind of individual strategies of coping with crisis. With a lack of collectivity and mobilization at a larger kind of more macro level. Now, and I enter now the case study 2, which had to do with the pandemic and the mobilization that resulted from this. So whenever my book was being published in 2020, the pandemic had already started, and immediately I started seeing the kind of mobilization that was lacking in the first case study of the Greek crisis. So the immediate closure of venues that was documented made musicians and other freelance performers find themselves without work overnight. And this, in combination with the absence of state support, partly because a lot of music work and other artistic work in Greece was very much undocumented and part of an informal economy, it awakened a lot of grassroots collective mobilization. So there were movements, online movements, where artists and musicians in particular gathered together and started thinking about strategies of resistance and bringing their demands collectively to the state and other organizations. Okay, so Support Art Workers was one of those collectives. Musicians in Crisis, which actually shared the title of my book, was another one. And these became very, very influential in the first few months of the lockdown and the pandemic. At the same time, there was a lot of strengthening of the traditional unions. So the Greek Musicians Union, the Actors Union, some of the umbrella unions for all performers and so on saw a lot of increase in members' participation in their campaigns and rallies and so on. So this kind of collective action, from initiating social media forums for labor issues to joining unions and demonstrations and organizing self-funded research projects to analyze the sector, would have been very unlikely until the end of 2019, even after a decade of economic crisis. The reason for this radical change was succinctly explained to me by Iakovos, a young musician who has been involved in arts labor activism since the start of the pandemic. With the first lockdown, he told me, overnight everyone was out of work. No one could pretend to be successful or to not care about money. We were all in the same boat. So what Iakovos is saying there is that the closure of venues that rendered all performers unemployed at once managed a double strike at two crucial factors that have been preventing collective struggle among musicians and other artists in the economic crisis. So let's take those one by one for a minute. So artistic pretense, the reactionary tendency to divorce artistic freedom from fair labor, which is similar to the Frith argument that I opened with. Even in times of crisis, this factor stood in the way of musicians openly raising grievances about their working conditions. This obstacle gave way in the wake of the pandemic that crammed everyone in the same boat, as Iakovos says, allowing musicians a space to voice demands without appearing too cynical or unartistic. Relatedly to this, the second factor is entrepreneurial individualism, which was also prevalent in the time of crisis. Musicians often appeared reserved in expressing concerns over their livelihoods in fear of being perceived as mediocre or unsuccessful. But the facade of resilience and success as an entrepreneurial strategy also became eclipsed by the eradication of performance opportunities as lockdown measures were implemented. Musicians had no one to pretend to. They were all stuck at home, out of work, and their screens lit with an outpouring of frustration accompanied by calls for solidarity. In these circumstances, collective struggle started to flourish. Musicians and other performers started joining their trade unions, and new grassroots movements emerged. So in conclusion, above else, here I'm trying to trace the awakening of new discourse around music and labor from the ground up. Our duty as music academics is to analyze and amplify these voices in solidarity to striving musicians and with close attention to their words. So even if, to return to Simon Frith, music perceived value is precisely as non-work, as he says, valuing those who produce it might indeed require us to acknowledge it as work. The recent awakenings of musicians to labor demands are contestations of the unjust and unsustainable circumstances of precarity and exploitation. Amidst this devastating impact on the loss of livelihood, The pandemic had also provided opportunities to imagine futures of music as a labor of love. Let's take a moment to entertain them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ioannis. Another quite moving presentation, certainly allowing the discussion with this political events, very promising in the Q&A session. We will move now for the last presenter of this first part of the session, Ojai Muzlu from Turkey. And her presentation is titled Rebuilding Beyond Bricks, Music Education for Long-Term Recovery in Hatay's Post-Earthquake Schools. Please, Ojai, present yourself.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Hello, dear colleagues. I'm Ojai Muzlu. It's a genuine privilege to join the ICTMD Dialogue 2. I'm Education Area Leader at the International Center for Cultural Sustainability at the Jiaotong University, located in the Guangdong province in China. I'm also Director of MIRAS, Center for Cultural Sustainability in Turkey. I will be mostly talking about the work with MIRAS after 2023 earthquake happened in Turkey. If there are any questions, I will be happy to answer after the video presentation. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Greetings from a sunny afternoon of Jiaotong, southern China. I would like to thank the ICTMD organizers for this interesting event, ICTMD Dialogue 2, and for including me. In a very short presentation, I will talk my ongoing project, Rebuilding Beyond Bricks, Creative Music Workshops in Post-Earthquake Hatay, which was started in February 2024. This work explores the transformative power of music as a cornerstone for rebuilding shattered social ecosystems. I look forward to our conversation later. In February 2023, a devastating 7.8 earthquake struck southeast Turkey. Over 50,000 people lost their lives. In Antioch, a city that represented a crossroads between European and Middle Eastern cultures for 2 millennia, 80% of buildings collapsed. In the immediate 2-week aftermath, I engaged in remote coordination of aid efforts. This experience revealed a critical imperative. Effective intervention required moving beyond individual citizen action to establish a legally recognized institutional framework. I will explain this more shortly. Academic inquiry over the last 30 years has witnessed a growing corpus of literature examining music education and community music initiatives within challenging contexts. These include environments characterized by significant social inequity, religious or political pressure, human conflict, and natural disaster. A notable finding from this body of work is the considerable convergence between the needs and challenges inherent in developing music projects in both post-conflict and post-disaster settings. The literature clearly indicates that conventional models for organizing and implementing music education are often problematic under such non-normative conditions. To this end, we co-founded and developed a non-profit organization, MIRAS, a Center for Cultural Sustainability based in Istanbul, with housekeepers and my Turkish colleagues. MIRAS, which means heritage in Turkish, has been operational for the past 2.5 years. The organization's board comprises professionals with diverse expertise, ensuring a multidisciplinary approach. The impetus and first focus of the activities of MIRAS for 2023-2027 are the survivors of Hatay. Realizing that Hatay needs more than mere physical reconstruction, we are committed to Rebuilding Beyond Bricks, a 5-year program focusing on culture and community, particularly for children and women. This project brought together Turkish and foreign artists, music teachers, and cultural professionals in a collaborative way in the southeastern province of Hatay in the city of Antakya, Turkey. Founded by our UK partner Sempre, our project seeks to explore creative music workshops as a means to develop skills as well as regaining a sense of control for children and youth in an environment where normalcy has been disrupted dramatically. Our initial interventions targeted the temporary container city and pilot schools in Hatay. These sites serve as new communal hubs for populations displaced by the destruction of their homes and schools. The children in these environments face significant adversity, enduring extreme temperatures in confined, poorly ventilated spaces, compounded by the loss of their educators. Our research has three questions. 1. What contributions can creative music workshops based on improvisation make to empowering young people in the context of post-earthquake recovery in Hatay? Second question, what are the expressed needs among youth of Hatay and how can instructors and trainers incorporate effective strategies for creative thinking into their teaching methods in container schools? 3. How can frameworks be developed to facilitate a sustainable relationship between sense of well-being, practical abilities, and artistic musical endeavors for students in this area and beyond? Rebuilding Beyond Bricks primarily takes an action-oriented ethnographic approach as developed in applied ethnomusicology, post-conflict music interventions, music education, cultural diversity, community music. Data from participant observation, pre- and post-workshop surveys, audiovisual recordings, semi-structured interviews have been analyzed using standard methods to identify themes and correlations as well as relationships between needs, expectations, intentions, and outcomes, which can widely differ in this type of project. Our project follows 7 steps: needs assessment, literature review, workshop design and implementation, data collection, data analysis, community engagement and stakeholder feedback, dissemination of findings. The activities have been extracurricular and students' participation are therefore have no bearing on formal circular teaching, learning or assessment. That said, there may be a perception among students that this might be the case and that participation or non-participation in activities might have a bearing on their grades. To mitigate for this, it was made clear to students throughout in verbal communications that the activities are completely separate from their formal learning assessment. We have completed many workshops since 2024 February with the musicians who have different musical backgrounds. Each musician facilitators targeted different sensory of the students based on their own artistic skills. 3 key components were in the center of the workshops. 1, creating a safe and supportive environment, allowing freedom of expression and avoiding pressure, avoiding content that may trigger their trauma. First phase of this project, the project has 3 components: rediscovering musicality from sound, exploring expression through improvisation by facilitators who are known role models for the youth. These feature informal but profound exercises, free from pressures for perfection in performance and from the need of formal knowledge of music notation or mechanistic structures. Children and youth are encouraged to explore their own voices and the sounds around them on their own terms, learning how they relate to different emotional expressions. You see the examples from the workshops with the jazz singer Elif Çağlar on the slide, pop blues musician Evren Can Gündüz, pop folk musician Selin Sümbültepe. For each workshop, the tutor's pedagogical approach mostly was based on improvisation expressions in 3 different genres. Collaborative improvisation and songwriting workshops we conducted also. These workshops are about facilitating group activities with students, composing and performing songs together. By empowering them to rediscover their compositional writing skills, students can not only develop musically but also get a feeling of regaining control after the world around them fell apart. In addition, this component can help them gain a deeper appreciation for their cultural roots. Because this is a very short presentation, I take one example as a facilitator to explain it more. On the slide you are seeing our facilitator Evren Can Gündüz. He's a versatile Turkish musician, singer, songwriter, composer and producer. He is quite famous in Turkey. widely recognized for his innovative and genre blending approach to music. The decision to focus this analysis on the pedagogical approach of Evren Can is grounded in its demonstrated efficacy and innovative nature. Gündüz's series of successful workshops in Hatay establishes his methodology as a replicable and impactful model. Furthermore, his significant profile as a practicing musician who demonstrates a pronounced ability to connect with youth audiences positions him as a highly relevant subject for contemporary music education studies. His work offers a compelling case study in moving beyond traditional technical instruction for foster creativity, engagement, and personal expression among students. Can's pedagogy offers a multi-layered and innovative model that combines experiential learning theory, creativity research, emotional and social intelligence development, phenomenological and body-centered approaches. This model brings a human and spiritual depth to music education by focusing on connecting with the inner creative source, which is often overlooked, especially in formal education systems. This approach emphasizes that creativity is not just a sudden inspiration, but a process that requires discipline, awareness, and inner readiness. Gündüz helps participants develop a creative resilience that is not only transferable to music making, but also to other areas of life. What can we learn from all this? We can create a replicable model once the project is concluded. This is an ongoing project, as I mentioned before. We are starting the second phase of the project in October, the last week of October in Hatay with our team. Improvisation-based workshops in container schools provided a critical outlet for emotional expression, cognitive development, and building resilience among students. Successful pilot workshops with 300 students demonstrate the program's transformative potential and provide a strong case for its expansion to 5,000 students. The project has established the groundwork for educational frameworks that blend practical skills with artistic exploration, aiming for long-term weekly student engagement. The documented results and demonstrable impact are designed to attract future grants from organizations focused on youth, arts, disaster recovery, and community development. The outcomes of the creative music workshops conducted with nearly 300 students across Antakya, Hatay have highlighted the transformative potential of music in nurturing both individual growth and a collective sense of community. This research has laid the groundwork for developing frameworks that integrate practical musical skills with artistic exploration, ensuring that students not only recover but thrive through a creative expression. It has also expanded the understanding of how instructors can incorporate innovative creative thinking into their teaching strategies, which can be applied in other regions impacted by natural or man-made disasters. As we move forward, the lessons learned from this project will serve as a foundation for future educational initiatives that harness the power of creativity and music to empower youth, build resilience, and foster sustainable cultural recovery in post-disaster contexts. Through continued collaboration and support, we can ensure that music education remains a vital force for transformation in communities recovering from crisis. The picture drawn by an 11-year-old girl is telling the story of her life before and after the creative music workshops. She presented her art just after our music workshop with Ayşegül Aykaç. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ojai, for this inspiring presentation, presenting us models of how to face crisis with the people we work with. And I move then this first part of our session to the floor for questions to our three speakers. Any questions from the audience? Okay, Sui Bank, please.
Yeah, just while waiting, Yeah, thank you very much for all your very insightful presentations. I am like totally impressed by the work that you've been doing. Yeah, but I'd like to know what are some of the challenges that all three of you all faced during this when you were working with in your particular projects. If you could just share some experiences with us.
Should I start first?
Yeah, and anyone, yeah, I think it's for all three of you. Yeah.
There are many challenges when you are working in a post-disaster zone. First, physical challenges, of course, to reach there. Every time you go there, we have so many logistic problems. Electricity is not working, and the kids cannot come to the school. The Hatay is still a big disaster zone, even though it's like 2.5 years past. Many people assume after earthquakes or after flooding or after many natural disaster happens, everything is okay, because many helps are being, so many donations happening and many people helped in the past, and a general opinion about the disaster zones, usually from outsiders perspective, everything should be okay by now. But we are struggling with this kind of thinking when we are working and trying to still help and work in the schools in Hatay. From the children and the education point of view, the duration of the education is very limited in the schools. So for example, primary school students are having a couple of hours education in the afternoon, and the secondary school students are coming in the morning. And when we organize our music workshops, we are usually trying to find the same students, same kids to work with. So, and also there's still so many things they need in education as a material. So many musical instruments. They don't have, many of the kids haven't seen any musical instruments in their life still in that zone. So we are, as Miras, with our NGO, we are trying to provide by asking some sports from this perspective. Also, we are also focusing on working with different musicians from either universities or Ministry of National Education registered primary school music teachers, or from normal outside of the education settings, the artists themselves. We are trying to give different palette of the musical education music to students. And it is also a bit challenging when we are doing this.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I want to share with you at the moment.
Well, yeah. Yeah, well, I think the two challenges I can think about right now is first, how to process how my country is changing so fast. So in the last, although I'm aware that maybe my country began its process to become a narco state in, I think 30 or 25 years ago, we began to face this reality recently, like 5 or 6 years ago. This means that the students that come to my classes that have come to my classes in the last 5 or 6 years are now direct victims of violence, of high rates of violence in my country right now. So it's kind of, for me, it has been a really unique, transformative, and really hard experience to face the fact that my students are being hurt by violence, and these bodies are the ones that are coming to my class to dance. So this has been kind of really hard for me, and I until now don't know how to face this new reality in my country. And I think the second challenge I would like to mention is that, of course, because they take my Ecuadorian dances workshop just before they finish their undergrad program, most of them feel it's the first time in their university experience that they have the chance to really research their own history through movement. So it's a really touching experience for most of them. And so I am aware that my classes have kind of a therapeutic kind of aspect, but my class is a dance class, and I'm not a therapist. So that's kind of a really big challenge for me to kind of differentiate and be aware that I'm kind of opening really intimate and really powerful memories and secrets from their lives and deal with it in the context of a dance class. That's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Gabriela. Johannes?
I mean, I'm aware that the kinds of crisis and violence and challenges that I'm talking about are a lot more symbolic, I suppose, and slower than the other two speakers. But I suppose some of the challenges are similar, mainly the frustration I think that I'm feeling whenever I'm kind of talking and collaborating with activists and trade unionists and campaigners and so on, and I see how much they're hoping to do and how slow the process is. So, as I said, during the crisis, the economic crisis up until 2019, my main frustration was that there was no campaigning, no collective struggle and so on. And then when that did emerge after 2020 in the pandemic, it was very short-lived. And even though there's still kind of movements going and a lot of people who are working very hard, we even had a conference 3 weeks ago with a consortium of different researchers who are doing work on the creative industries, and unions were there, and some of the stakeholders from the state were there as well. And the complaints and the questions and the issues that were brought up were exactly the same as 5 years ago. So the progress is very slow. It's very hard not to get frustrated with these kinds of reactions. So I think that's my main challenge, is to kind of deal with the inconsistency between the hopes that I would have and the work that a lot of people are putting towards this and the results that we can see on the other end.
Thank you, Johannes. We have another question by Christian Onyeji. Please, Christian.
Yeah, thank you so much. Also, thanks to all the presenters. A follow-up to the question by Swiven, I wanted to ask, was there any way to get the views of other musicians, researchers, musicologists, on, how they are processing, the crisis in their works and so on? Because it seemed all the three presenters, dwelt on what they were doing themselves. But we are looking at also the possibility of knowing what is going on in the context of your work, your research, how other people are processing the same challenges, based on crisis, in the context. And also, the presenter from Ecuador, the very first presenter, I'm not sure I got it, but is Ecuador still under the rulership of the white? Because I was hearing a lot of white things going on. I don't know. But if it's not, I also got the impression that your work as a performer, as you said, is a form of resistance. And there were protests that were, that formed the background of your presentation. I wanted to know how this came out in terms of results, your work. How did you process this, and what is the outcome, amongst or within the whole background of protests and resistance, by means of your dance performance? Thank you. So the first question is for all the presenters. Then the second is for Maria.
I'm happy to start if you want with this one. So in terms of the experience of the musicians that I was talking to, yes, absolutely. And it's a key part of the book that I've written on musicians in crisis, is the narratives and storytelling of musicians in the middle of crisis. So and I had to take that out of the presentation because I had run over the 10 minutes. But one of the arguments that I make in the book is that there's a specific sort of subjectivity that is constructed on in relation to the crisis. I call that crisis subjectivities, and it was musicians were expressing that through storytelling, through narratives of key moments in their lives where the crisis became part of who they were and changed who they were and so on. So it is very much about this kind of personal narrative that changed them in different ways with the economic crisis. The pandemic is very similar as well. A lot of very personal testimonies on how people coped with it and how they changed them in good and bad ways and so on. So yeah, absolutely the personal kind of experience is key to what I've been doing, those kind of stories and narratives and so on. And if you're interested in reading some of that, I'm very happy to share.
Ojai, Maria Gabriela. Ojai?
Yeah, I agree with our colleague about that. And as a person who used to live in Hatay in the post-earthquake zone, but I haven't experienced the first hit. But we were there in the second big earthquake, and I lost many of my students. And after the occasion, when we visit on the second week of big earthquake Hatay, I met with some of them, my conservatory students. It was very hard to listen because they were also musicians. We are all coming from musical backgrounds as a musicologist, ethnomusicologists. How we are going to continue what we are doing was a big challenge. And in our research or academical publications or projects, my perspective quite changed. My approach has changed towards music education a lot. Music education in formal settings and ethnomusicological field works changed after disaster because they are experiencing in big trauma. And in the field work, when all the components, all the conditions change, when the story of people completely change, how we are going to continue ethically also approaching to the subject from ethical perspective became paramount for me.
As for the first question, I think, of course, performing arts is taking part in this kind of massive strike that my country is facing right now. I can think especially of indigenous traditional music, which is being an active part of the strike. For example, you could see what happened in Efraín Fuertes' funeral. So music was a kind of really important part of that kind of rituals, local rituals. And also I can think of some local performing arts groups that are definitely being part of taking the streets with the rest of people. However, I have to say that repression has been so hard this time that we are all basically really afraid of going to the streets. So, for example, in 2 days, indigenous people are massively coming to the city for the first time in this strike. This has never happened because in the past strikes in my country, indigenous people have come to the capital city from the first day of the strike. Today, we are in the 18th day of the strike, and they have not been able to come to the capital city because of repression. So they are coming in 2 days. And what I can sense from myself and from my colleagues is that we are totally afraid. We have no idea what to do, how to deal with what's going to happen in a few days, because we are afraid. We don't know what the government is going to do to all the millions of people that are going to come. So in that kind of context, performing arts, I don't know, if you ask me, I prefer to go and help cook and help make sure people are going to be safe, help heal wounded people, than perform in the streets, just because the situation is really hard right now. But in terms of classes, I somehow feel like what we can do as lecturers, as artists, is really powerful because students are really afraid, and a class can become a really safer place than streets to help them process our current reality. As for your second question, I don't know if I understood correctly, but I was talking about the whitening phenomena that all Latin American countries face since the colonization, since centuries ago, that kind of makes us interiorize the idea that we are never enough, because we are not as white in physically, phenotypically, and also culturally as the Europeans or North American cultures. So when my students come to my class, I can sense their kind of wounds in that aspect really clearly. And I try to work with that, and I try to give them a kind of tools and techniques and a space for them to talk about their kind of local identities, their diverse and their complex personal identities, so we can dialogue critically with an education that has somehow forced us to not talk about our non-white, about our Afro-Ecuadorian or Mestiz or Montubio or indigenous roots.
Thank you very much to the three speakers. We have a question by Svanibor Pettan. Please, Svanibor.
Thank you, Samuel, so much. Best regards to all of you, dear colleagues, dear friends. I think it's a very inspiring session, and I thank you all for your contributions. So I have very brief questions, maybe for all three of you, if I may. So in Ioannis' case, I'm very grateful for this very useful classification based on references. And maybe I would just point to one more. It's a book that is maybe not so well known by Viktor Stojcica. It's exactly about the manipulation of emotions. So it would very, very well fit into that category. And then for Gabi, I'm very curious about the experiences from the neighboring countries. I mean, dealing with comparable sets of problems, to what extent you, for example, deal with, especially with this narco situation? Do you share experiences? And so maybe if you can develop a little bit more about that. And Olcay, I was curious in your case about the musicians like Can Gündüz and so. How do you get these musicians? Are they very enthusiastic to join the MIRAS, the projects that you are providing? Or how does it work actually? Because you provided many also technically very useful directions actually how to deal with these situations. So I'm curious about this, how this works actually in practice, this mechanism. Yeah. Thank you all.
Please pass the floor to Ioannis, then Gabi, and then Ojai.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for the reference, and if you could write that in the chat, Svanibor, I'd be very so that I can look it up. That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
With pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can answer, Miguel. Yeah. Or shall we wait?
Oh, are you asking me? It's fine because I have to check about this reference, so maybe I will send it maybe to Ioannis afterwards if it is okay.
Absolutely, yeah, no okay. Rush at all.
I think it's in French.
Go ahead with the other answers. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question, Svanibor. So I can think especially, well, I think the whole world, but especially Latin American countries are facing several, like really, really harsh realities right now. I can think, of course, of Argentina. Silvia is here and we have talked about it, but I can also think about Mexico and especially about our neighboring country, Colombia. And each time I talk with Colombian colleagues, I always have the feeling that they have lived what we have begun to live like 5 years ago. They have been living the same reality for like 3 or 4 decades. So they have become somehow our mentors because they know what we are feeling right now. And they somehow are kind of totally used to this reality that is really, really new for us. So in that sense, it has been really enriching for us to understand that it's very important to network and to kind of become allies among, for example, Colombians and Ecuadorian performing artists, because they have a much more kind of old school, like they know how to deal with it as performing artists. So, for example, you in Colombia right now can find really strong and really clear performing arts proposals that talk about mainly how to talk about and how to explain new generations phenomena that are rooted on historical realities. Because the problem we are facing as educators, as lecturers right now, not just the performing arts, but as lecturers in general, is that new generations don't understand the historical roots of what's happening in our countries right now. And the danger of that is that they can simplify the reality, and they are not necessarily aware that the racist discourses that are kind of really present in these phenomena like the national strike that is in my country right now have historical roots, and we have to understand the historical roots in order to develop works in performing arts that are kind of coherent to our reality, especially to not replicate racist kind of points of view. So in that sense, I think that Colombia has a lot to say, and yeah.
Thank you, Gabi. And Ochoa, please.
Thank you very much, Svenibor, for this question. It is the most challenging part of our project, actually, finding facilitators, musicians, or music teachers. In 2024 February, when we started creative music workshops, we specifically want to choose people from Hatay, the musicians from Hatay, to help the musicians, of course. Therefore, we did numerous workshops with Selin Sümbültepe, a musician from the earthquake zone. She was living both in Hatay and Istanbul, and her other musician friends. So we went many mountain, different small villages around the Hatay. And then after that, when the core idea of this creative music workshops is to introducing children a different way of learning music, also discovering their own musicianship, let's say. So how we can provide this was actually based on finding people from outside of their Minister of National Education standard education system. So I reach out musicians from the music industry and experienced music teachers from Istanbul. I've been working in the cultural sector in Istanbul for over 3 decades right now. So I know some people, especially Evren Can Gündüz was somebody I've been following for a long time on Instagram or social media. I'm observing his work and also connections with any generations he's been working with. He has a great impact on people through his music. And other musicians, for Elif Çağlar is coming from jazz scene, and others, some of them are doing dance, the body percussion and dance therapy. So it is important to give different genres in music, different way of learning and experiencing music for the kids, for us, especially for this project. The most important thing is the calendar, of course. You know, everybody is very busy, and going to Hatay is a big trouble. So we connect with many musicians first. Whoever is okay to come with us to the region, we organize the conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ochoa, and thank all the 3 speakers for this thought-provoking beginning of our session. But we shall move to our last 2 speakers, last 3 actually, 2 presentations. First one will be given by Ukeme Udo and Isaac Ibude from Nigeria, and it's titled Shared Voices, the Survival of Nigerian Music and Dance Research in Times of Crisis. Please, Isaac and Ukeme, present yourselves shortly, and we'll proceed to the video.
Hello, my name is Ukeme Udo, and I work with the University of Ochoa. My area is ethnomusicology. I work centered around traditional musicians. Today I'll be myself and my colleague will be speaking on state policies. We'd like to share with you some of the challenges of how research and dance cultures have survived in Nigeria. I'd like my colleague to also introduce himself before the video. So, thank you.
My name is Isaac Ibude. I'm in Port Harcourt, the University of Port Harcourt Department of Music. That is where I teach. My research area is in ethnomusicology, performance, and sacred music. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank the ICTMD president for the invitation to be part of this dialogue today. I'd like to begin our presentation with a very interesting story. There's a comic story that has been circulating on social media platforms and popularized by some Nigerian comedians about how the Nigerian hellfire will be such a blissful place to be. The story reports that regardless of the source of the fire, firewood, electricity, solar, and renewable energies, it would be impossible to actualize hellfire in Nigeria. This is so because the government will borrow the money from their allies and share with contractors and suppliers who will embezzle the funds, and everyone will move on as if nothing happened. The stark reality of this comic fiction is not about the Anthropocene or ecological crisis in Nigeria. It is the stark reality of how Nigerians engage with comedy to cope with diverse or multiple crises. Let's dive into the main issue of our presentation. There is an increasing global crisis, man-made and natural, impacting music and dance communities as illustrated in the COVID-19 pandemic experiences of 2020. As Tim Ruiz has noted, the situation of many people in the world seems only to be getting worse and worse, making the prospect of doing field work in growing number of places in the world nearly unimaginable. In addition, the United Nations currently lists many countries where there is open armed conflict between groups or between resistant groups and the government. In addition, the HIV/AIDS pandemic has wrecked some parts of the world, most notably Africa. As shown in the national and international headlines, as well as in recent discourse and publications in international journals, our conversation highlights a small number of the crises in Nigeria and how ethnomusicological research and researchers have survived. Existing literature highlights these crises in Nigeria has continued to grow in the fields of security, medicine, conflict, and survival studies. However, these complex crises have been underexplored along ethnomusicological narratives in Nigeria. Our presentation fills this gap and contributes to research on crisis and conflict in ethnomusicology and ethnochoreology. The main problem of the study is to highlight new ethical models, collaborations, and sustainability in crisis context. Our survey highlights how collaborative research during multiple crises in different parts of Nigeria can contribute to a global perspective on how research in crisis context should be construed or interpreted. The crisis in Nigeria should be interpreted as crisis in the plural because of the complex interplay of crisis within a crisis. Nigeria today is facing multiple crises, from terrorism to farmers and herdsmen killing, land grabbing, kidnapping, economic uncertainties, ecological issues, oil politics, unrest among minority groups, technological problems, poor funding for infrastructure, the list goes on and on. The choice of shared voices as an entry point to this conversation is intended to illustrate how the entire Nigerian society is entangled within specific crisis context. For example, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic had an unparalleled impact, precipitating not only direct threats to physical health, but also widespread economic and psychological challenges. While the COVID-19 pandemic was not man-made, man-made dimensions such as the between the federal government and academic union negatively affected most public universities in Nigeria. Notably, salaries were halted, whereas other countries were sharing palliatives and providing other support strategies. The next slide, we look at some solid examples of the Nigerian crisis. We have two short music videos to highlight Nigeria's shared narratives, and our analysis will be based on them.
Because of oil and gas, my city so dark. Pollution make the air turn black. Every man have to stay on guard. I fall too easy, and I party whiskey. But no be disability, no be disability. I fall too easy, and I party whiskey. But no be disability, no be disability. People there with they sleep for them house, they getting over. Some they walk on the other side of town, them they hold up. Some they pray for the traffic, make them hail you, make you show love. And when you reach, so they go back home, you go club. I know say no easy, my brother, but still they take them easy, my brother.
If them take for oil, even if them burn the oil, Nigeria go survive. I say if them drink the oil, no matter how them try, Nigeria go survive. I roots them strong for ground, ancestors no go gree, Nigeria go survive. The God of thunder and lightning, unite and shield Nigeria, Nigeria go survive. Nigeria go survive. Africa go survive. My people go survive. Oh, Nigeria.
Analysis of the music. The song text amplify various crises, serving as examples of shared narrative in the Nigerian crisis. They also showcase both the crisis context and the collaborative survival strategies. In our discussion, our study has revealed how researchers and people they research now live and work in adverse environments, such as in communities invaded by bandits, kidnappers, farmers through herders clashes and other forms of insurgencies. There are others working in internally displaced persons camps where there is socio-economic collapse, poor medical facilities, technological disruptions, and non-existent technological infrastructures affecting both artistic practice and research. Our study also highlights how both applied and theoretical approaches can contribute to collaborative actions between researchers, that is us, and the people we research, that is them, in closely intertwined relationship. In the applied narratives, there are numerous examples of films, dramatic enactment, comedy, music, and other creative outputs that showcase the activism of Nigerian research population on issues of crisis in various contexts. The same can be said of theoretical models, especially in joint authorship between researchers and their indigenous collaborators. See Zewi et al. 2008. To conclude, the recurring question here has been, what are the potential pitfalls that must be addressed during joint research? We conclude that although the Nigerian experiences represent a multiplex of collaborative research in times of crisis, which must be assessed in specific contexts, we highlight many approaches, of which one is the ICTMD dialogues, which began in 2021 and has survived, nurturing new discourses and connections around the world. In addition, there is a need to address the ethics of care in balancing academic objectives and community needs, thus creating an enabling environment for the cultural well-being of both the interlocutors and the researchers alike. There is also need for long-term accountability beyond fieldwork between the us and the them narratives if sustainability is our goal. Lastly, let us recommend that governmental and institutional roles and responsibilities, especially the role of universities and funding bodies in supporting crisis research in locations with multiple crises such as Nigeria. As a survival strategy, both researchers and the interlocutors now share in the activism. This serves as an important benefit and shared voices of collaborative research in various crisis contexts. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Yukeme and Isaac, for this important, cogent presentation. And now we'll move to our last speaker of today's session, Irene Karongo Handleby from the Solomon Islands and also based in New Zealand. Resilience and adaptation in Solomon Islands through times of crisis. Please, Irene.
Hello, Diana. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. I am from both New Zealand and Solomon Islands. I've grown up in both countries. Most of my work these days is mostly focused on grassroots education through organisations that I've helped to formalise, and particularly around performing arts collectives to help uplift and to encourage Indigenous performance. I also own a music and hi-fi store, so we work together within the community to help uplift and highlight bands and local musicians in our area and nationally in New Zealand as well. So far everyone's talks tonight have been absolutely wonderfully awesome. Mine is a little bit more general, but I hope you enjoy and I look forward to the questions afterwards. Hello, Diana. Hello, Gita. My name is Irene Karongo Handleby, and welcome to my presentation, Resilience and Adaptation in Solomon Islands Through Times of Crises. Today I will briefly talk about cultural resilience in the face of crises. I will touch on Malaita music and dance cultural practices and highlight how our communities have adapted research practice to respect local tribal issues and concerns. My ancestral homelands are the Lau, coastal and Bailalea bushforest regions of North Malaita Solomon Islands. My people are Tuiasi, people of the sea, and Tuitolo, people of the bush. The Lau and Bailalea area is a rural environment in North Malaita where local subsistence living is still commonplace. Through daily fishing and gardening practices, our people follow in the footsteps of our ancestors. In everyday life, we use natural resources, for example, firewood for cooking and rivers for bathing. In Bailalea, we live among the dense rainforests that teem with plant and bird species, mountains, rivers, and tributaries. Along the coast, we navigate daily between the 60-odd artificial islands that grace Lau Lagoon that were built by our ancestors. We travel the outlying coral reefs and the ocean. In Lau and Bailalea, my people observe the elements and have a symbiotic relationship with the environment. I am a researcher. I am an Indigenous Solomon Islander. I am spiritually tied to the land and sea of North Malaita Solomon Islands. This is my ancestral homeland. Lau and Bailalea tribes are my community, my family. I live through every joy and every crisis with my family members. We observe, discuss, and share together. As a researcher, there are topics and experiences that I can speak about in a public, formal way. And there are those stories we keep private and close to our hearts. The stories I share today are from my own lived experience and distilled from the experiences and stories of my close family members. Over the past 130 years, Solomon Islanders have experienced colonialism, witnessed the arrival of missionaries and government administrators, seen the horrors of World War II battles and the introduction of foreign-owned businesses. We've experienced the fight for independence, a political coup, intense conflict, natural disasters, and climate change. In the midst of these events, Solomon Islanders have recorded change through their oral traditions, performing arts, and visual arts practices. Dance, song, storytelling, carving, weaving, tattooing, canoe, and house designs, they all leave impressions of the histories our peoples have experienced and the places we have lived. For generations, these practices have connected Solomon Islanders to one another and to their land, water, and sky environments. Significant events and changes have had a lasting impact on the collective nation, influenced changes to cultural identity and practice, challenged Indigenous belief systems and moral codes, and threatened spiritual health and well-being. In 1999 to 2003, Solomon Islanders experienced the tensions, an era of civil unrest, turmoil, and great fear. On the morning of the 5th of June 2000, the streets of downtown Honiara, Guadalcanal, where my family also lived, were placed in lockdown by armed militants in a coup to overturn Solomon Islands Prime Minister Ulufalu. In the months following, the capital city became a canvas for fires, where homes and buildings were destroyed all along the east coast of Guadalcanal. Public killings reinforced the fear, and thousands of people quickly chose to leave Honiara and return to their tribal lands. Only a handful of my Malaitan family remained in Honiara. The majority returned home to North Malaita. In the months following, our North Malaitan communities quickly swelled to large numbers. Without cash incomes, those that had returned had to build houses, plant gardens, return to living the natural, non-city ways of our ancestors. As time went on, our peoples began to engage in traditional ways of being and living. Slowly, there was a return to the arts, to the culture instilled in us since birth. By 2004, our village life had begun to settle. Our people were self-sufficient, isolated from urban areas, and kept moderately safe. International peacekeeping troops had also arrived in Solomon Islands, Ramsey, during 2003, to command some control over the lawless areas and against militant aggression. Another decade later, in 2014, I returned home to begin cultural music and dance research with my family and communities. By this time there was a buzz in the air. Numerous performance groups had evolved over this time, and elders were actively teaching our youth songs, dancing, and most importantly, retelling stories, and encouraging our youth and family members to learn and pass on our history stories. Those that had lived in urban areas prior to the tensions were very keen to learn. It was clear that we were in a cultural renaissance. Family foundations had been reinstituted on our lands, and I was struck by the resilience of our peoples. During the 20th century, foreign ways of thinking had been introduced through schools and religion, and our family members had experienced the downfall of our Indigenous culture and practices. As a young person, I did not think that there would ever be a return to the same kinds of cultural practice as previous. I was surprised to learn that the impact of the attention years had driven cultural learning. Living in tandem with the environment meant our people were engaging more in ancestral styles of living. Isolation helped to foster an interest in performance, dancing, music and drama, and to instill pride in our North Malaitan ways of thinking. The arts became an emotional outlet during a time where many had lost their homes, their jobs and livelihoods. Music and dance gave purpose and entertained. Art and culture became an outlet for grief. Music and comedy became a counter to distress and sorrow. In 2012, my parents were treated to a performance by the Takwa Women's Barasili group in Takwa. Earlier in the year, they had performed in Auki, Malaita, at the 2012 Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture. This group was led by our mum's sister, Tete Lucy Bakale. The objective was to formally teach the traditional dances of our ancestors to our young girls and women, to create and reimagine songs of our present. In the following short audio clip, you will hear the audience participation, the humour and joy that is central to this performance. This rendition of Whāloa, a custom wedding song, is a light comedic performance. It is worth noting that formal women's performance is a relatively new practice. In the past, prior to the introduction of Christianity, all formal dance was performed by men and directly related to our indigenous religion. I chose this Whāloa performance as an appropriate recording for this particular YouTube video and recorded session, because it is an example of a song that has previously been performed publicly. I have not included a video recording of this performance. This is to maintain the privacy of our peoples and the rights to our own recordings and performances. In 1997, I returned home to Honiara after living overseas. As I washed the dishes one morning, I listened to a CD by the band Deep Forest. My mum, Modesta, arrived in the kitchen looking utterly shocked and surprised to hear the Deep Forest track, titled Sweet Lullaby. She immediately questioned me. "How did you get this recording? This is our song. How is this on a CD? Who made this into a CD?" As Afunakwa sang, my mum knew every word and sang along with her. This is a language now regarded as an old language and rarely understood by young people. My mum explained how her grandmother from Bagu would sing this lullaby to her as a baby and young child. She said it was to be sung by someone that was an orphan, whose parents had passed away, and that it held important spiritual meanings, and taught about our Malaitan spiritual thinking and being. How is it that this song appeared on a pop music recording, distributed to millions across the world, without the consent of our people? In the year 2000, Stephen Feld published an article titled A Sweet Lullaby for World Music. This article brought the lullaby Rorowela, sung by Afunakwa of Bagu, to the world's attention. Afunakwa's voice and the Rorowela melody are the focal points of the famous track Sweet Lullaby that my mum had heard in our kitchen, that had been released by Deep Forest in 1992. The Bagu people did not grant Deep Forest permission to use Rorowela in their Sweet Lullaby recording, nor was there any acknowledgement to the Bagu people in the CD liner notes. However, the Pygmy people of Africa were acknowledged. No monetary compensation was given to apologise for the improper use of this Bagu sacred song. Sadly, Deep Forest's total disregard for a consent process with the lullaby's owners reflected negatively on ethnomusicologist Hugo Zemp, who had originally recorded Rorowela in 1970. Zemp's ethical process had been honourable. He valued the trust and relationships he had built over many years on Malaita, and he had developed an exceptional rapport with the Malaitan people he worked with. Over the last 20 years in North Malaita, Deep Forest's actions have had far-reaching consequences for our community and for those conducting research in North Malaita. Our elders and culture bearers have commonly stated their distrust of visitors and those that wish to record us. It is for this reason that we choose not to openly share music videos and audio of songs and performances that are culturally important to us on open platforms. The 21st century has seen a cultural revival and transformation in North Malaita. Our people experienced a forced return to ancestral practices during the ethnic tension years. Despite the fear, the upheaval, and negative impact of these tumultuous times, our people adapted and responded as a community. Our songs and dances helped our communities to connect and to find meaning and to remember who we are. Our arts continue to uplift us, to have cultural and spiritual significance and meaning, and so we will continue to honour, respect, and safeguard them. Tagitumas.
Thank you very much, Irene, for this thought-provoking presentation. And now we'll move towards the last part of the second segment of our session today, with questions from the floor to our three speakers. And we'll have, after a few questions to them, sort of a general Q&A part directed to all presenters. So please, anyone from the floor? Kristen, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentations by the two groups. I wanted to find out, you see, we got a lot of background information from the two presenters and presentations regarding what constitutes crisis, the challenges in both ends, more or less. But I wanted to hear more about the specifics of, the music research, musicologists' activities. What exactly are the specifics of their challenges, of the issues, how they are navigating the crisis in their various contexts? That's what I'm interested in. I'm from Nigeria, of course, and I know the Nigerian presenters give vivid data or information on what is happening. But I wanted to know more about how this is affecting research in music and dance. The same thing with the Solomon Islands person. How did you, conduct a study to find out the challenges of music researchers, musicologists in whatever crisis situation you identify in the island? Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't know if I can respond and give you a specific example in crisis situation. I want to give in the part of Nigeria where I live, not to about 5 kilometers from Port Harcourt City in River State. Is right in the creek. We've been having some crises that are related to cult activities, clashes between one cult group and another that have disrupted cultural activities in that part of the country. One of the challenges that in order to elicit data, there are some things that have to change. There are some rituals, especially that are performed when an aged person passes on, maybe in their 80s or 90s. There are some rituals that are done in the night, music and dance, to celebrate the passing away of an elder. But because of these court clashes and those rituals need to still take place, those dance movement, music. So what at that particular period, because the crisis was so extended, especially in 2010, 20 through to before relative peace came to the creeks in that part of the Niger Delta. What happened was that some of those rituals, dance movements, were brought to the day. Instead of performing it in the night, it was brought to the day, maybe in the evening at about 4 p.m., 5 p.m. These were dance activities, celebrations that used to take place at about 12 midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. So that was the way in that particular culture, in that area, they were able to make sure that they bury their dead and do the necessary festivals. And it did not just only happen in the culture. For those who are Christians, apart from traditional worshippers, what they used to have as vigil in the night, where they sing hymns and sing songs as a way of celebrating their members, church members who had passed on. Such activities were brought to midday, noon in the afternoon. And they now coined a term called day vigil. And it's funny, vigil it talks about is night, it's a night activity. But because it was moved to noon, and there is no English word like day vigil, but in that community, when you say day vigil, everyone understands that the activity that was supposed to take place in the night had been moved to the daytime as a result of the crisis. So that's how the people, so researchers and local people or who are indigenous in that part of the Niger Delta had to cope with this crisis, with this shift. However, the musical renditions, dance movement, and steps were not reduced in any form. Everything was still presented the way it should be, but the only difference was that the time of the day which those dances were presented had to be moved because of insecurity. Thank you.
Yeah, can I come in there? In my own part of the country, the major challenge that I encountered was the ethical protocol that has changed. In fact, when we're taught ethics, we are told not to give any inducement, to your traditional, to your interlocutors and so on. But because when you get to this environment, these traditional singers and drummers see you as government, as part of the government. They see you that the government has given you so much money that you're coming to research into them. And at that point, it's difficult for you to explain that you are not part of the government. And so the approach, the ethical process of saying no inducement, don't induce them is we won't even be able to explain that to them. So all we need to do is to look for a way to get them to participate with you, give you the information, and at some point you have to pay them money. You pay them money, and that most of them have not eaten for days, and so you have to look for a way, raise money from your little resources to pay them, for them to be able to sing to you, to be able to communicate what they are facing to you. And so there is a little ethical changes that I've seen, in some parts, that I've been able to research into. So these are the new challenges that we begin to face. Before now, it wasn't this bad. So I think that's one of the challenges that I needed to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Christian. I very much related to Ukeme and Isaac's presentation and the idea of crises after crises being a part of who we are and what we face. And I purposely chose the tensions today to speak about because I thought it was easy to be finite in a very short amount of time. But I can give you an example of how those times affected us. And I think one of the things about being an Indigenous researcher is that it's lived research, right? So my research is over my whole lifetime and my experiences that I draw on. But my mum passed away about 8 months before the official date of the detention, of the date that I told you about, where there was the coup began. At that time, things were already incredibly unsafe in our place. And when she passed away, the funeral is, for us, or Maya, is the most important ritual of our tribes. And people will come from everywhere to be together, and then we will sing with our loved one for 3 days and 3 nights, non-stop for 24 hours, just continuous singing and continuous performance. Because Mum died at such a terrible time, most of our family couldn't be there for this very, very important ritual. And so music and culture was interrupted in ways that completely changed our grief cycle, the way we interacted with one another. And so then the tension happened. All of my family was evacuated from the Solomon Islands back to New Zealand and Australia, and I returned to the United States. Still grieving our country, still grieving our mum. We weren't able to return until 2004 to put a stone on Mum's grave, at which time we resumed our funeral rituals that we would have done when she died with all those members of the community that couldn't be there. And that included all of our songs and performance that we would do at that time through that grieving stage. So that gives you an idea of some of the kinds of changes that happen through crises in our cultures. A little personal story.
Thank you, Irene. Any other questions to our last 3 speakers? I guess I have one, which maybe will be, a key to our transition to the general session, because I think my question applies also to the first 3 presentations. And my question, Isaac, Yukeme, and Irene, is related to a discussion that has been going on in the humanities about how to conceptualize crises in a time in which they happen so frequently, and they are so intertwined globally, at least it seems so, even though they can acquire some sort of specific characteristics. In each place, they are more dramatic at one point or another, and so on. And this has called my attention since I read the book called Disorder by an anthropologist called George Ballandier, published in 1988. And he questions in this book, that has a subtitle, In Praise of a Creative Potential and so on that disorder brings. This idea that the social sciences have sort of modeled their thought, their action, their reflection on ordered models of society. And so crises stand out as some sort of a specific moment of disorder and so on. And he proposes something that sounds awkward at first, that we think about society as a permanent effort to overcome disorder. Disorder is always embedded in social formations of all sorts. And so my question would be to the 3 of you, but also to our 6 speakers. opening already a transition to a general discussion. If it is possible to think of what you are describing in your presentations as such as well, I mean, something that is embedded in some sort of potential which is inscribed in the social formations that you're talking about. A potential to some sort of disarray, a potential to disorder to break out. And also this is also linked to some sort of international movements, global movements that enhance, I mean, this potential, sometimes very predatory, as we are seeing all over the world. This would be, I have other questions too, but I'll just pose this one, a very big one, to the three of you and also to the three other speakers. They feel like answering.
If I get you right, if I understand your question, is challenging, especially in our own situation in Nigeria, to conceptualize crisis, because the crises are in multiples happening at the same time. And in different parts of the country where you have researchers, colleagues, like Ukeme talked about ethical issues in relating to the people within the culture. Why that is happening in another community, not just too far from where you are doing your research, there are ritual killings, kidnapping, armed robbery that have distorted that local community. And at the same time, there is oil spillage and all of that, and there is hunger in the land. So the crises, when we try to conceptualize crises, in some contexts, you have 2, 3 things happening at the same time that is impacting the locals and you as a researcher coming into the place. So the context is very, very crucial. Secondly, what type of crisis, how much does it impact the people and all of that. For some communities, for those who are in the northern part of Nigeria, it is banditry, Boko Haram, Islamic terrorism, and all of that. So their own situation at that part of the country is different from the southeast. And it's also different from the Niger Delta, the part where I'm located in Port Harcourt in Rivers State. So it becomes very, very difficult to conceptualize crises nationally without looking at these various brands, because what is happening in one part of the country or in one locality is different from the other. But however, the intensity, the impact from one community to another differs depending on the number or different varieties of crises that is happening and impacting the community. That is what I will contribute. I don't know if I answered a part of your question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me also add to what Isaac has said. The idea of humanities in this context, like Samuel rightly talked about, I think the world needs to understand that the humanity in us has what we go through, the challenges we face every day, not only as researchers, but as members of a community. And so we cannot, it's not only during crisis or during disorders or wars and so on, but this has become part of our daily life, that we become part of what has happened. And so that becomes part of what we study, what we live, how we survive. And so all this becomes a new way of seeing humanities, a new ways of how we study the entire crisis. And so if you put all this together, then that becomes the new model of seeing ethnomusicology, a new model of seeing ethnomusicology in times of crisis and so on and so forth. That's just the way I have conceived that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to add to that too. The idea of disorder is an interesting one. I think in our families, what I've observed and seen over my lifetime, and certainly we've talked about it a lot, is that we have this very accepting community and of crises. Like there's a normalization of crises because there's so many things that have happened over such a long period of time. So that's one aspect. But then also on top of normalization and this acceptance, I agree with the whole idea of humanity coming out, the best coming out from the worst situations in the middle of that normalization has been the way that our families and our tribes have generally come together to overcome whatever the latest survival thing is that we have to overcome. And there's definitely within our tribes the idea that if you're surviving and you've survived to this point, you know, that is, we're grateful for those moments, and we're grateful for grief is very much a part of everyday life. There is no doubt people do not take grief for granted at all and are very expressive of grief, and that definitely comes out in our performing arts as well. Yeah, I don't know if I've really answered your question, but just some thoughts that popped out when you were speaking. Thank you.
Thank you. And I asked our first three speakers if they wanted to say something and to respond, to react.
Just very quickly, I wanted to say, and also I want to apologize because in a couple of minutes I'll have to run away because my childcare arrangements are running out. But just wanted to say to add to whatever all the previous speakers have said, which I totally agree, is I think it's also important kind of drawing a line between disorder that is to some extent natural to human societies and which at the time that you're talking about, Samuel, the book was written, I suppose the human sciences were trying to deal with this transition to dealing with disorder in productive ways and not looking for order in a way that social sciences in the early and mid 20th century had envisaged. So not to be thrown by disorder, but actually to engage with it and make meaning of it. So I think that's important. But I think we need to draw a line between this and crises that are caused by different types of oppression, also crises that are caused by neoliberal capitalism, all these kinds of crises that are, I don't think, unavoidable. And I don't think that we need to necessarily adjust to deal with them and just accept them, but we can also push back against them and say they're not natural, they're not unavoidable, we can do things about them and avoid them in the future and in the present. So I think there's different types of crises going on, and a lot of the crises that I think we're discussing today, we could push against the idea that they're just natural disorder that happens and we have to deal with them, and also kind of look at the causes and put blame where it's due.
Other reactions?
Well, in my case, what I can say regarding to Samuel's question, first, I wanted to briefly share with you that a few days ago, in our 15th day of our national strike, we had a beautiful event related to performing arts, which was that in the middle of a really, really violent part of the strike that was taking part in one of the cities from the Andean part of my country, which has a high rate of indigenous population. There were a group of clowns that became part of the strike, and they began to somehow imitate or mimic the governmental violations of human rights. And policemen who were supposed to kind of repress the strike were so shocked with this performance that they didn't know how to react, and they just let them pass. So that was kind of a miracle for me, because that was really, really powerful. It was kind of the first time in these kind of more than 2 weeks of really, really hard times for my country, really violent times, that they managed to pass as part of the strike without being kind of stopped. And the second thing I wanted to share is that I think the strikes that have happened in my country in the last 10 years, each 3 years more or less, are an really important and essential moment that expose really important phenomena in my country. For example, the problems that we have related to racism. So each time an indigenous strike comes, I think we definitely can take that as an opportunity to talk more openly about a problem that affects us all the time, but that exposes itself during specifically indigenous strikes. And when we were talking among performing arts colleagues, especially in terms of what are we going to do 2 days from now when they come, because it's going to be a massacre, like we know that, we are thinking that perhaps the more kind of coherent thing to do, because most performing arts that are from the capital city, like myself, we are recognized as mestizos, so we have more privileges than indigenous performing artists. So we are thinking that maybe we can act as somehow human shields, like trying to protect indigenous colleagues, performing artists, when they try to perform their rituals or ceremonies, especially around the murder of Efraín Fuérez a week ago. So we are taking that idea from like other colleagues that have done similar things in past strikes.
Thank you, Gabi. And Ojai, please react to. We're running out of time, so after Ojai, I'll pass the word to Suibeng to close this session. But please, Ojai, make her comments.
As a last word, maybe I can indicate that music and dance, especially in my case in Hatay, recognized not as a luxury thing anymore. Like when the crisis happened in anywhere, especially the crisis of the terrorism, stuff like that. First thing has been cancelled in music industry, all the concerts and stuff like that. But after big earthquake, the sudden disasters, the music is seen as a vital component of a comprehensive humanitarian response. It changed everything for ethnomusicologists and musicologists, in my opinion. And it became paramount. Engaging with traditional music and dance, it became like an act of resilience for public, for people in there. They say we are not leaving, we are here with their songs and lyrics, even though people who have not engaged with any music, they began to sing. And singing, collective music making, it became powerful engine for rebuilding social capital, shattered by conflicts or disasters. And I think these maybe answer Hab's question, also where music and dance intervenes, sits in our research or in our order of crisis. I think it is in the first line of the need of things that people need to do. It's increased the value of music and dance. And it reminded people how it is important to continue for our sustainability works also.
Thank you very much, Ojai, and also our 6 speakers in the 5 presentations in this very inspiring session. And I'll pass the word to Subeng, our ICTMD president, for the closing remarks for the series this year. Thank you, Subeng, please.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say thank you to all the presenters and also for Samuel for wonderful moderation. And for all the insightful and heartwarming discussions. We are very privileged to learn from your experiences. This is the last dialogues that we will have for this year, 2025. But next year, we will have an open call so that our members will have a chance to present what they've been doing in times of crisis, as well as our first team, which is on intersecting methodologies and theories in music and dance studies. So please stay tuned, for the announcement. Finally, I would like to thank Carlos for helping us to prepare the videos and also for running the Zoom sessions since we started the dialogues in 2021. So thank you very much. He will be leaving us as the executive secretary, and we will miss him. So thank you, Carlos.
Thank you so much.
Next year.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. I'm
Bye-bye.
closing the session.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.